It all began in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where rows of identical houses and manicured lawns give the appearance of peace and order. From the outside, everything seemed perfect. Picket fences, freshly painted mailboxes, and neighbors who waved politely across the street. But underneath that serene exterior, tensions were simmering, mostly due to one person. The neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer, the infamous HOA member everyone secretly referred to as Karen. She had joined the Homeowners Association with a smile and a handshake, projecting friendliness and community spirit. But over time, it became clear that her version of community spirit came with a strict set of rules and an obsession with control that no one had anticipated. The first sign of trouble was subtle. Minor complaints started appearing on official HOA letters, often about things that were barely noticeable. A neighbor's lawn had a few weeds peeking through the otherwise pristine grass. Another had hung a welcome mat with colors deemed too bright by Karen. A holiday decoration was considered non-compliant. At first, residents tried to dismiss these letters as standard procedure, assuming the HOA had certain aesthetic guidelines to uphold. But soon it became obvious that Karen wasn't just enforcing the rules. She was weaponizing them. She would patrol the neighborhood as if on a personal mission, armed with a clipboard and a pen, documenting every perceived infraction. Every deviation from the HOA guidelines was cataloged meticulously, and letters began to flood mailboxes. What made her particularly dangerous wasn't just the enforcement, it was the way she wielded authority selectively. Some neighbors seemed immune, often those who agreed with her or were too timid to resist. Others became targets repeatedly. No matter how small the violation or how quickly it was corrected, arguments at HOA meetings became a regular occurrence. Karen would speak with a tone of absolute certainty, citing bylaws and regulations with a meticulousness that made it difficult to argue without risking further scrutiny. She often cited obscure clauses that most homeowners didn't even realize existed, bending the rules to fit her narrative. New residents quickly learned to be cautious. A minor landscaping choice or even the color of a mailbox could trigger an official complaint, followed by a demand to fix the violation within days or face fines. It didn't take long for the atmosphere in the neighborhood to shift. What was once a place of comfort and security started to feel tense and unwelcoming. People whispered about Karen in hushed tones. Friends who had once enjoyed casual gatherings avoided her watchful eye. Every action became measured. Every decision weighed against the possibility of a complaint landing in the mailbox. Despite this, many residents initially tried to comply, hoping that following the rules precisely would satisfy her and restore peace. But Karen's rules were constantly evolving. Today's solution could be tomorrow's violation. If a neighbor installed a new garden lamp, it might be considered too bright. If someone trimmed their hedges just slightly off the recommended height, it could trigger a letter. She relished the enforcement process and seemed to derive satisfaction from the anxiety it caused. It was almost as if the power itself was intoxicating. And as her influence grew, other HOA board members either enabled her or remained silent, unwilling to confront her aggression. Either out of fear or self-interest, the breaking point for many residents came with a simple mailbox installation. A family who had lived in the neighborhood for years decided to replace their old mailbox with a new, modern one that complied with every visible guideline. Within days, a letter arrived, this time more aggressive than usual. It not only demanded the mailbox be removed, but threatened escalating fines, legal action, and formal complaints filed with the HOAS attorney. The family tried to reason with Karen, showing her the official regulations and citing compliance, but she dismissed their evidence and insisted that her interpretation of the rules was final. The tone in her communications shifted from bureaucratic to personal, almost mocking. She appeared to enjoy the discomfort her letters caused, and the family, like many others before them, began to feel trapped. Stories like this started to accumulate, and soon the neighborhood buzzed with tension. Conversations across fences, text message chains, and private meetings revealed that Karen's actions were far from isolated incidents. Every block seemed to have at least one family affected by her relentless enforcement. Some neighbors quietly paid the fines to avoid confrontation, while others attempted to challenge her through proper HOA channels, only to find that the very system designed to protect residents was now weaponized against them. Emails, phone calls, and petitions seemed to vanish into a bureaucratic void, never reaching a resolution. It was during one particularly intense HOA meeting that the situation truly escalated. Karen had summoned a resident for questioning over a potted plant that she deemed non-compliant. The homeowner, a professional with a calm demeanor, presented evidence, cited the regulations, and tried to reason with her. Instead of resolving the matter, Karen doubled down, publicly humiliating the resident in front of the board and other neighbors. The meeting became tense, voices rose, and the air seemed charged with the collective frustration of everyone present. Witnessing this, other homeowners realized that passive compliance would never end the harassment. It was no longer just about the rules. It was about restoring dignity, fairness, and sanity to the neighborhood. The idea of legal action began to circulate quietly at first, whispered between families over backyard fences and private phone calls. The stories, letters, and documented harassment provided a strong case for those willing to take a stand. But pursuing a lawsuit was intimidating. Many feared retaliation, the cost, or the possibility of being dragged into a drawn-out legal battle. Still, the more the residents shared experiences, the clearer it became that something had to be done. The harassment wasn't just an annoyance anymore. It was systematic, deliberate, and psychologically taxing. The first part of the story ends here as the tension builds. The stage is set for the moment when one brave homeowner decides that enough is enough, leading to legal action that will challenge Karen's unchecked authority and shake the HOA board to its core. The story teases a dramatic confrontation, an unlikely hero stepping forward, and a reckoning that every resident had been quietly hoping for. This is the calm before the storm, the moment where frustration, fear, and courage converge to set the stage for the next chapter of the story, where rules, harassment, and the power of one individual collide in a dramatic legal battle. The moment the lawsuit was filed, the atmosphere in the neighborhood changed almost overnight. What had once been whispered conversations across fences now became urgent discussions at kitchen tables, backyards, and online community groups. The documents, meticulously collected by the brave homeowner, were shared with neighbors, revealing patterns of harassment, selective enforcement, and blatant misuse of authority by Karen. Every letter, every fine, and every meeting record was proof. And for the first time, many residents felt a sense of hope. They were no longer helpless. The system could finally be turned in their favor. News of the lawsuit spread like wildfire. Karen, who had once held the neighborhood in the palm of her hand, now faced the uncomfortable reality that she could be legally accountable. Her confident smirk at meetings and emails disappeared behind forced smiles and thinly veiled irritation. Board members who had quietly supported her, or remained silent out of fear, suddenly found themselves under scrutiny. Some attempted to defend the prior actions of the HOA, citing tradition, precedent, or vague regulations, but the strength of the case against them was undeniable. The first court dates were tense. Lawyers pored over bylaws, past letters, and documented infractions. Every minor violation that Karen had issued became a testament to her obsession with control rather than community welfare. The plaintiff, the homeowner who had taken the courageous first step, stood as the voice of countless neighbors who had suffered in silence. Witnesses were called families who had received threatening letters over Christmas decorations, people fined for minor landscaping adjustments, neighbors humiliated at board meetings. The court was presented not only with the legal documentation but with the emotional toll that the harassment had caused. In the courtroom, tension ran high. Karen's demeanor wavered under cross-examination. Every attempt to justify her actions was met with calm, well-prepared responses from the plaintiff's attorney, highlighting the systematic nature of the harassment. One by one, the absurdity of the alleged violations was exposed. The court learned about the mailbox incident, the welcome mat, the minor hedge misalignment, and countless other infractions that had been escalated unnecessarily. It became clear that these were not isolated mistakes or standard enforcement. They were part of a deliberate pattern outside the courthouse. The community watched with anticipation. Neighbors who had once feared reprisal now gathered to show support. The solidarity that had been quietly growing behind the scenes was now visible and powerful. People shared stories of how Karen's letters had disrupted family routines, caused stress, and even affected their mental health, the plaintiffs. Courage inspired others to speak up, knowing that their experiences were valid and mattered. Even those who had remained silent out of fear now felt empowered. Meanwhile, Karen tried to maintain her authority through the HOA board, sending emails, making calls, and attempting to influence other members to intervene. She argued that the lawsuit was an overreaction, that the rules were in place for a reason, and that the plaintiff had simply taken things too personally. But the court saw through this carefully constructed narrative. Legal experts highlighted the selective enforcement, the inconsistency in her interpretations of the rules, and the targeting of specific neighbors while ignoring similar or more serious infractions by others. Every attempt to deflect blame only strengthened the plaintiff's position. As the case progressed, the tension between the residents and the HOA board reached a boiling point. Meetings were canceled, letters went unanswered, and the usual channels of governance became unreliable. Karen's sense of invincibility began to crumble as she realized that the community was no longer intimidated. She had underestimated the power of collective action and the resolve of individuals who were willing to fight for fairness. Meanwhile, the plaintiff meticulously documented every interaction, every retaliation attempt, and every procedural misstep. Ensuring that the case remained airtight, the media began to take notice. Local news outlets, intrigued by the David versus Goliath nature of the conflict, covered the story of a homeowner challenging an overbearing HOA board. Interviews with neighbors highlighted how Karen had used rules as weapons, while images of her letters and fines provided tangible evidence. The coverage added a layer of accountability that was impossible to ignore, and the community felt a sense of vindication as their experiences were validated publicly. Inside the courtroom, the emotional stakes were high. Karen tried to maintain composure, but small cracks appeared in her demeanor. The tension was palpable every time a neighbor stepped forward to recount their story, every time the plaintiff's attorney highlighted a rule that had been misapplied, and every time evidence of selective enforcement was presented. It was a battle not just of legal expertise but of narrative control. The story of a peaceful neighborhood disrupted by harassment resonated deeply with everyone in the room. Even outside the court, neighbors continued to support the plaintiff. People shared their experiences online and encouraged others in similar situations to take a stand. The sense of community, once fractured by fear and intimidation, began to rebuild. The idea that rules existed to protect people, not oppress them, gained traction. Residents who had once endured Karen's harassment quietly began to feel empowered. Knowing that change was possible, every day of the trial seemed to expose new details about how Karen had wielded her authority. Letters threatening fines over trivial matters, meetings where residents were humiliated, and attempts to silence dissent became evidence of a larger pattern. The board members who had silently allowed this behavior were implicated by association. The entire narrative shifted from isolated complaints to a systemic problem, highlighting the dangers of unchecked power within community governance. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation as the final arguments unfolded. After weeks of testimony, mountains of evidence, and countless cross-examinations, the moment that everyone had been waiting for had arrived. Karen, once the undisputed enforcer of the HOA, sat stiffly, her confidence finally cracking under the weight of public scrutiny and legal accountability. The plaintiff representing not just their own struggle but the frustration and suffering of an entire neighborhood stood poised, calm, and resolute. Every eye in the room was fixed on the judge as the words began to take shape that would forever alter the landscape of the community. The verdict did not come as a surprise, yet it carried the full weight of justice. The court found that Karen had indeed abused her authority, weaponized the HOA rules, and targeted residents selectively in a deliberate campaign of harassment. Every letter, every fine, every attempt to intimidate a neighbor was accounted for and cataloged as evidence. The judge's ruling emphasized that the actions of the HOA, under Karen's influence, had gone far beyond simple enforcement. They had become a systemic problem that undermined trust, safety, and the very purpose of community governance. As the words of the ruling echoed through the room, a collective sense of relief and triumph washed over the residents present. Outside the courthouse, news crews captured the moment as residents celebrated. Families who had been victims of petty fines and humiliating letters shared smiles, hugs, and tears of relief. The plaintiff, who had dared to take the first step against Karen's reign, was hailed as a hero. Interviews captured the astonishment and pride of the community, many of whom had lived in fear for years. The story resonated far beyond the neighborhood, a powerful reminder of the importance of standing up against abuse of power and asserting one's rights. The aftermath of the lawsuit sent shockwaves through the HOA board. Karen, stripped of her authority, faced personal and legal consequences. The court ordered her to step down immediately, along with several board members who had either enabled her behavior or failed to act responsibly. The ruling made it clear that HOA boards are accountable to the residents they serve, not the other way around. The entire structure of governance in the neighborhood was reevaluated, with temporary leadership installed to ensure fairness, transparency, and adherence to true community values. For the residents, the change was palpable. No longer did a single person dictate the terms of community life. Neighbors reclaimed their lawns, decorations, and property without fear of harassment. Social gatherings, once subdued due to fear of scrutiny, returned with laughter and shared joy. The empowerment of the community was visible in every street, every yard, every interaction. People who had once been silenced now spoke openly, offering guidance, advice, and encouragement to one another. It was a neighborhood reborn, forged in the fires of conflict but strengthened by unity, resilience, and courage. The story also became a cautionary tale for other communities. Local news features highlighted the dangers of unchecked authority within HOA boards, the importance of transparency, and the legal avenues available to residents facing harassment. Online forums and social media groups erupted with discussions, as individuals shared experiences and strategies to protect themselves from similar abuses. The narrative extended beyond a single neighborhood, inspiring homeowners everywhere to understand their rights and to stand firm against arbitrary enforcement. Karen's downfall served as a pivotal lesson in the limits of power. The letters, fines, and petty complaints that once terrorized residents were no longer tools of control. They became evidence of a failed approach, a cautionary tale of how personal ego and a desire for dominance can ultimately lead to exposure and accountability. The contrast between the fear she once commanded and the respect she had lost was stark, and it underscored a fundamental truth: authority is only as legitimate as the trust and respect it earns. Abuse erodes both, and justice, though delayed, can restore balance. Meanwhile, the plaintiff who initiated the lawsuit became a symbol of perseverance. Their courage, meticulous documentation, and willingness to confront an intimidating system reminded everyone that individual action can create community-wide impact. Neighbors who had once felt powerless realized that standing together, gathering evidence, and seeking legal recourse could yield real results. The collective morale of the community soared, and the streets were no longer silent with fear, but filled with conversation, collaboration, and shared pride. In the weeks following the verdict, efforts to rebuild trust continued. New board members were elected with input from the entire community, ensuring fairness, accountability, and transparency. Policies were rewritten with clear language, providing residents with a roadmap for compliance while protecting them from arbitrary harassment. The narrative shifted from one of fear and intimidation to one of empowerment, learning, and mutual respect. Families decorated their homes freely, children played without fear, and neighbors shared stories not of fines and threats but of triumph and resilience. This story also highlights a universal truth: standing up for what is right often requires courage, persistence, and the willingness to face uncomfortable challenges. The residents of this neighborhood demonstrated that abuse of power, no matter how entrenched, can be confronted and overcome. They proved that a single voice, backed by determination and the support of a community, has the ability to change the course of events. The neighborhood was not only restored but transformed, now serving as an enduring example of accountability, fairness, and the strength of collective action. As the sun set over the streets that had once been tense and fearful, there was a sense of calm, accomplishment, and renewed unity. The HOA board had been dismantled and restructured, the rules were finally applied fairly, and Karen's reign of selective enforcement had ended. Residents could finally live without fear, reclaiming their autonomy, property, and peace of mind. Every mailbox, every lawn, every minor detail that had once been scrutinized was now a symbol of resilience and restored dignity. This concludes the story of how a single, determined homeowner, armed with evidence, courage, and the support of neighbors, was able to hold an overbearing HOA accountable. It is a story of vigilance, justice, and the power of standing up against abuse. The lessons resonate far beyond the neighborhood. That rules should serve communities, not individuals. That abuse of authority can and will be challenged. And that courage and unity are powerful forces capable of restoring fairness and balance. This narrative serves as a timeless reminder that even in the face of intimidation, integrity and persistence can prevail, transforming fear into empowerment and oppression into accountability.